Welcome to Spring into ETF Investing, a special edition of ETF Market Insights. On today's special episode, we will be discussing a macro update and what's next.
This is ETF Market Insights, and I'm Erin Allen, VP of Online Distribution with BMO ETFs. Welcome to the channel and our Spring into ETF series. For those who are new to the channel, our goal here is to provide timely market-related insights and ETF-focused education to Canadian do-it-yourself investors with the goal to become your trusted partner in investing. We want to bring you access to the same level of high-quality resources that advisors and institutions receive in our industry. Before we begin, a quick reminder, we are not providing investment advice or recommendations. Today is all about education and information. Today, I'm going to turn over my hosting duties to Amber Kanwar, the host of a brand new investing podcast, In the Money with Amber Kanwar. She's one of Canada's most trusted and recognizable business journalists. For over a decade, she was a familiar face on Canada's flagship business channel, BNN Bloomberg. Amber's going to be joined by BMO's senior economist, Jennifer Lee, to look at the economic backdrop facing Canadian investors, covering off the good, the bad, and the ugly, and focus on what matters for your investment portfolios. Over to you, Amber.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amber Kanwar. Welcome to ETF Market Insights. There is no shortage of factors impacting markets today. We've got BMO Capital Markets' Jennifer Lee to dive into the economic outlook and to provide some insights to help you understand what might lay ahead. Jennifer, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Everyone comes to the Economist to figure out what is life going to look like in the next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, and down the road. And I'm so curious, with all the headlines flying fast and furious about tariffs and changes to policy, how difficult is that job these days?
Holy cow, is it difficult. And I'm sighing a lot. I find I do that. But I don't think, and I've been doing this for quite a while now, and I don't remember a time where things were so challenging. We've been operating under this environment of, like WTO rules. We've had all these trade agreements from the FTA to the USMCA, and now all of that is basically in flux. We don't know what exactly is happening. We have the USMCA renewal. We're supposed to be renewing it or up for renegotiation in May of 2026, but it looks like that time frame has sort of sped forward a little bit, right? So that's all in play now. Tariffs, we know we have tariffs, sort of accepted it at this point. Ideally, there will not be, but this is the way it is now. And we'd like to know exactly what the percentages will be. What is the number going to be? What particular goods or services or industries are we targeting? So all that is in flux again. So we'll find out on April 2nd. So in the meantime, this is certainly hitting confidence levels, not just for consumers. And this is especially in the US. You saw the latest consumer confidence surveys get hammered, completely hammered. Business surveys as well, showing a lot of uncertainty. So you're seeing it play out in terms of lower capital inflows, Canadian dollar is weaker, consumer confidence again is taking a hit. Businesses are sort of holding up and saying, should we be investing? Should we be buying that new factory? Should we be hiring all these new people? We don't know. So we've been taking the scissors to our growth forecasts.
Well, I want to talk about that because it's one thing to do that. You have an input. I know tariffs are X%. They're going to be in place. Then you know how to model that out in your forecast. But to your point, we think it's going to be this. The next day, maybe those tariffs aren't actually in place. And what that does is it creates paralysis, right? And you have to factor that in. That paralysis means maybe I won't buy that equipment. Maybe I won't hire those extra employees that I thought I needed.
Exactly. And just because you know what the number is going to be, you don't know what the retaliation is going to be. So it's almost like you can see the tariffs getting higher and higher potentially. And so you don't know what's going to happen with interest rates and how the market's going to react to everything. So yes, definitely making things a lot more challenging.
So with that in mind, let's call it a giant asterisk beside some of these forecasts. What is your forecast for growth?
Well, for now, so we actually just, when everything started, rolling out, we actually now officially do see a recession in Canada. So we've got, by just the technical definition of 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. So we've got a sizable drop in GDP in Q2 and in Q3, and then things to start picking up a little bit in the fourth quarter. But on a Q4 over Q4 basis, we're still down like 0.7% year over year. So for Canada as a whole, for 2025 and 2026, we're looking at 0.5% growth. And that was down a lot. We used to have, almost 2% growth before all of this, the trade wars kicked in. US is definitely not going to be unscathed from all of this. We used to have over 2% growth for the US, and we've shaved it by maybe 0.4, so about 1.8% for both this year and next.
And a lot of this is happening, because we're getting dented from these tariffs, but these actions by the US are also going to slow down the US economy, and we're linked to that.
Yes, exactly. So this is a big deal for Canada, right? We've got, and I always cite these facts, 75% of everything that we export go to the US. 50% of everything that we import come from the US. So this is like a huge deal for Canada. This is like our biggest trading partner. But like you said, the US is also going to be hurt. 33% of all US exports go to Canada and Mexico, thanks to the USMCA. And it's not just like a third, right? They cover 72% of all export categories. So it goes across a lot of different areas. So they are certainly going to be hurt by this.
We have to talk about what the mitigating factors are. Certainly domestically, we have two potential avenues. We have central banks and we have government, right? And of course, there'll be an election to determine what path the country takes on that front. But let's just stick with maybe central bank policy. The Bank of Canada has already cut rates and signaled, they're prepared to do even more if tariffs take a bite of the economy. How aggressive do you expect the central bank to be when it comes to cutting rates? How aggressive can they be?
Ooh, okay. So they were already the most aggressive out of all the developed world. Like in last year alone, they cut 175 basis points, and already another 50 basis points so far this year. So the last meeting that they cut, there was actually discussion about staying put and not doing a thing. But because of all the uncertainty over tariffs, they decided to cut 25 bips. So because of that, I think they've already done so much. So I think there is sort of a limit to how much they can do. But right now we have 3 more rate cuts coming into play, 25 basis points at each of the next 3 meetings. So 25, 25, 25. So we see the Bank of Canada going down to 2%. And again, we've already cut so much already. So this is already going to be a big amount.
And I want to nerd out here for a second and ask you about stagflation. This is when growth is stagnant, but inflation is high. And I'm curious, because tariffs are inflationary, right? They literally jack up the prices on everything. Do you think this is going to blunt the ability of central banks to come in and cut rates? Because central banks really care about inflation, right? They don't want that to get out of control. And it might limit their ability to cut interest rates.
That's a great question. So, and yes, they are totally focused, and that's part of their mandate, right? But there are also 2 sides to that coin, I guess. So you've got the government as well that could step in. So the first impact, I think, with inflation, with all the tariffs, is that you're going to see, as you pointed out, price levels rising. So that can also limit how much people are going to potentially spend. Consumers, especially in the US, could think, okay, I'm going to stick with this higher priced import, or I'm going to stick with this potentially lower price, but still, price is still going to be rising no matter what, item that was produced domestically. Or they could decide to just hold back and not spend at all, which could potentially be recessionary if they completely stop spending. But I think central banks are going to be watching this very carefully, especially on the inflation front. Fed Chair Powell says, we're going to be, we're not in a hurry, but I think they're going to need a few months, maybe 2-3 months of bad inflation data before they start doing something. It's not just going to be 1 month, but that will at some point start slowing inflation down. But at the same time, governments could step in and we'll start seeing more stimulus. And as you pointed out, whatever the new government here in Canada is going to do, we could see lower corporate taxes. We could see potentially personal taxes coming down. All those barriers across the provinces, there's already talk about bringing those down as well. So there's going to be progress made to make sure that we don't hit stagflation.
Well, and I think that's a good thing to point out, is that there are policies that we could take and put in place to get out of our own way, like those interprovincial barriers, like potentially cutting taxes. But you also have to talk about the spending. For so many years, you and I have tracked, okay, when is Canada going to get its fiscal house in order? When are we going to get back to balance? Does this basically throw all of that out the window, and you can expect that there's going to be a lot of spending either at the federal level or at the provincial level? So
Canada's not going to be alone on this. I think we're going to see this everywhere. And this is another time, just like during COVID, you have to. And we're actually, our finances are actually in better shape than some other places. But if I can just, bring up Germany as an example, I'm super excited about Germany and the fact that this new government is now, in play. They still have to set up their coalition government, but, they're ready to spend the 500 billion euros of that defense and infrastructure fund. Brussels is creating this 150 billion euro loan for weapons fund, something like that. And hopefully we're going to loosen up the brakes a little bit for all the other different European countries as well. So there's going to be a lot more spending, especially on defense.
I do want to go with you on this Germany point, because Germany is sort of like the poster child for fiscal restraint. So
Yes.
just underline how wild it is that they're
God,
the ones
yes.
telling you, go out and spend.
Yes. Oh my God, because their debt brake shows that they cannot spend more than, their budget deficit can't be more than 0.35% of GDP. And then you've got the opposite, for example, in the US, and they're like 6.5% or whatever of GDP. So it's a huge divergence there. So they can spend.
It's like a Depression era grandparent telling you to go buy a Ferrari or
Yeah.
something like that. I think that's how much of a change it is. Okay, bring it back home. You're calling for a contraction in the economy, a recession, a technical recession this summer. I think a lot of people will want to know, how's that going to show up in my life, with employment, going into this situation, there were already cracks forming in Canada's economy. Unemployment was already rising. We were already seeing some concerns about the credit picture. How much worse does that get?
Well, if we actually do have a recession, and this is one time I would love to be wrong, it's going to show up on the unemployment numbers for sure. We're going to see an increase. We've got the unemployment rate potentially going as high as 8%. Especially if you think about like the number of jobs in the auto sector, and they've got I think the factor was for every direct job in the auto sector, there are 10 indirect jobs that can be affected. So you will start seeing the jobless rate pick up. Yeah.
And autos have been a specific sector that's been targeted by the U.S. administration. We're very exposed there. We're also as a nation exposed to housing. And there's already been a bit of a slowdown there. How do you expect, jobs and housing, those two things go hand in hand?
Yes. So this is where the housing market is going to it was almost like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And it was the housing was starting to react a little bit to all the cuts coming from the Bank of Canada. So we're starting to see things level off a bit. So this, of course, is going to put them back again. So not the best picture right now, but again, this is what is going to happen when you have a recession with loss of jobs. Housing is going to slow back down again. And then, of course, the Bank of Canada is going to start potentially cutting rates again. Another benefit, by the way, I'm going to say that there is a benefit if the Canadian dollar weakens further. That could be a boon for our exporters. So we could see some impact there, some positive impact. But I think certainly on the fiscal side, new measures coming from the new government, again, anxious to see what is rolled out, will hopefully help cushion the blow.
Well, that's a lot to factor, a lot of negative things. Any beacons of hope, any bright spots that you see out there, or are these, I guess, really sobering statistics that especially policymakers need to take stock of?
You're right. Very sobering, totally sobering. But I always say, why waste a good crisis, right? This is a time to make some changes. Easy for me to say because I'm not in the government, but, make some changes that will be good long-term, not just that's going to get us past the next, year or two. Again, corporate taxes cuts, personal tax cuts, cutting down those interprovincial trade barriers, things like that, starting to create trade agreements with everyone else in the world. This is a good time to just, as a good wake-up call, maybe we shouldn't be so reliant on the US.
Jennifer, thank you so much for joining me. That's Jennifer Lee joining me, senior economist at BMO. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Remember to catch my podcast, In the Money with Amber Kanwar. We try and keep you in the money, and we'll catch you next time.